This is Duke University.
Good afternoon and welcome to the season premiere of Left to Black. Today we're joined by two young scholars, Professor Jessica Marie Johnson and Professor Howard Rambsy II. Two young scholars who are doing cutting-edge work within the realms of race, African American studies, and quote-unquote digital humanities. My name is Anthony Neal and this is Left to Black.
Yeah. Eric, you're a real life G for this one. Yeah.
Good afternoon and welcome to Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal, and we are joined this afternoon by Howard Rambsy II, Associate Professor of English and Literature and Director of the Black Studies Program at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, and the author of the new book, The Black Arts at Enterprise and the Production of African American Poetry. He is also the curator of the site, SIUE Black Studies. And we're also joined by Professor Jessica Marie Johnson, who is a postdoctoral fellow in the Africana Research Center at Penn State University. She, of course, is brand new, talking about that brand new spanking PhD in history that she just got from the University of Maryland. And she is the curator of several sites, including Diaspora Hypertext and African Diaspora PhD. How are you folks doing this afternoon?
All good. Glad to be here.
Good, thank you.
So I wanted to have this discussion about the digital humanities, right? Particularly in relation to Black studies. You know, because that's the new buzzword, right? Everybody is trying to figure out how they can plug in what they do online and in a digital context, whether or not that's consumer classes where you're teaching the 10,000 people or just trying to have access to stuff online. I think far too often, though, when we hear digital humanities, that for the vision of most of the folks who are in the position to make this stuff happen, the folks who can sign checks, it's really just being able to have access to somebody's Shakespeare poem, you know, in a digital context, you know, for someone to be able to look at. And what struck me about both of your work, part of it coming from the stage that you are in your careers, is that it's kind of the digital humanities is a wide open space for you, right? You're literally working through this idea, how do I make my work not just accessible in these broader contexts, but to be able to build meaningful collaborative relationships within those contexts, and also to kind of expand the idea, the brand, if you will, of what Black studies is and should be. So I'll start with you, Howard, particularly because you're in this interesting position of doing this kind of work and directing a Black Studies program. You know, when you envision the digital humanities, what are you envisioning for yourself, for your work, and the work of the field?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. You mentioned that accessibility, because that's always one that sort of stands out when people start talking about technology, and particularly with Black folks, they will talk about accessibility. But I have to say that even before digital humanities, one way that I really got into thinking about technology in a serious way was through Afrofuturism. And I think you were part of the list too, the Afrofuturist list. Alondra Nelson had started that. And one of the big arguments that she was making early on was not just, think about Black people not having technology. You're saying, what is it they do when they have it? What are some of the distinct things? So for me, I think running Black studies and thinking about technology, there's been a lot about this. And okay, we know we have this blog. We know we have this thing we do on Twitter. So what are some of the things that we can do to really build on what we've already been doing, to expand it, to connect with folks in ways that we normally wouldn't connect to? So it's always been something about that, figuring out what can we do when we do have the technology. It's always been the place where we've started.
You mentioned the blog piece, right? Because I can remember talking to a colleague as recently as a year ago, very excited about a new blog. And in some ways, the blog is almost an antiquated form.
It's true.
Right, and I mean, a blog was something that was hot and exciting, 10 years ago, but in 2012, what's the kind of next step for this? And when I think about your work, Professor Johnson, in some ways, there's no blueprint for this, right? You are literally trying to work your way around what your presence is going to be in the digital world. And it's this idea that, Jessica Marie Johnson might be a home base for this, but you spun it out in very different kinds of ways. Talk a little bit about these two sites that you curate, diaspora hypertext and also African diaspora PhD. What are you trying to do with both of those sites that are separate and distinct from each other?
Sure, sure. I mean, one of the things that's been interesting about sort of my engagement with the digital humanities, and I call it, it's been called a kind of digital universe that I've created around Jessica Marie Johnson and my persona as an academic, as a scholar. And one of the things I've been trying to do is really similar to what Howard is saying, is that, you know, there are ways that Black studies, that Black history, that scholars who are interested in the Black experience, life, and culture can engage with technology and can use it in different ways. So they can use it in a very utilitarian way, use tools and what, you know, digital humanities people kind of call hacks to make their lives easier. They can use it to publicize material that is usually lesser known in a kind of mainstream way. One of the things I've been doing with diaspora, the Jam Johnso Tumblr, which is also called Diaspora Hypertext, was the original Diaspora Hypertext before I turned it into a blog, was really kind of document what is happening with slavery and ideas of slavery and histories of slavery on social media. So what are the kind of iconic images that circulate? So you have Douglass that circulates very often, Harriet Tubman that circulates very often, and Bob Marley also. You know, like there's certain images and iconic references for thinking about slavery and what does that mean? Well, what I wanted to do with African Diaspora PhD and Diaspora Hypertext, the blog now, is take that further. So African Diaspora PhD is a space where the most recent scholarship, and it's curated by me, so it is biased in that sense. Right. The most recent scholarship on Atlantic African diaspora, Afro-Atlantic world, work by people like Vincent Brown, and bringing forward work by people like Michael Gomez, Stephanie Smallwood, Jennifer Morgan, bringing that and making that very public and visible so that people who are searching for it on the net can find it. One of the things that's been kind of interesting, and we could talk about this also, are the ways that even though I'm posting abstracts and maybe first paragraphs of things, I can't post full articles. Those are sort of behind different kinds of paywalls. So there's that kind of still that barrier between, you know, the spaces in the ivory tower and academia where we have this like rich access to knowledge and people who just want to access it online. But I like to think of African Diaspora PhD as a space where people can at least enter into that conversation. And Diaspora Hypertext is more of a space where I'm really trying to think through what is this connection between Black studies and the digital humanities? What can it be? And it's both sort of me processing through what does that look like theoretically, what does that look like pedagogically, what does it look like as far as what kind of research gets done, and how do scholars use tools out there to better themselves as they move through the ivory tower process. But it's also part of engaging a longer conversation of what's been happening with the digital humanities and Black studies and people who are doing things in queer theory, people who are doing things in activism. There's a hashtag that I've been very engaged with called TransformDH, which is about bringing in intersectionality, moving beyond kind of normative ideas of who is a digital humanities scholar, which has sort of been imagined as kind of a white male academic. And it's really not. You know, there are ways that we as people of color and people of all kinds of identities are very, very engaged with what's happening with technology right now, but are not necessarily having that conversation in the digital humanities space. And Diaspora Hypertext is trying to add to the conversations already happening around that.
You know, I find it always ironic. There are a bunch of scholars who are known for doing new media. Some of them are my colleagues here at Duke. And one of the things I find very interesting with those kind of scholars is that very rarely do they actually produce content. and that this strikes me as odd. I mean, what's the point of talking about new media if that's not about producing some sort of content or applications or something? You know, it's this real kind of disconnect. But to go in another direction for a second, you know, one of the things I like about both of your projects is that, you know, Jessica, you're a historian, so, you know, the archive is like your second life, right? You know, that's how you see the world. And I don't know whether you would agree with this, Howard, but in many ways you're a literary historian, right? So you have a certain kind of, you know, sense about the archive also. You know, we go to your site, Howard, and there's always going to be some archival thing of some book. I mean, the Negro Digest post, for instance, that you recently put up. And I'm looking at that post and longingly thinking about what would it be like actually to have a print journal in 2012 that would cover just a range of things that, you know, that are just on the cover of that Negro Digest. Given that kind of archival work, do you find it's a challenge to get the younger tech heads to take serious the value of the archive, but at the same time to get those folks who are so committed to the archive to see the value of having the archive represented in a digital context where it can take on another life, in ways that it doesn't in the stats.
Yeah, no, it's funny. I mean, I sometimes always come back to Du Bois and think about that double consciousness. But here's one of those double consciousness, right? That archive on the one hand versus something that's very modern, very contemporary on the other. And so you were mentioning that disconnect between the content produced and then like just being really into new media. Yeah, because think about something like Negro Digest, Black World, and how much was being produced.
Yeah.
I mean, they were just publishing. I mean, Nikki Giovanni has all of these reviews in Negro Digest and Black World. You think about Larry Neal, you think about Hoyt Fuller, you think about Barack. All of these folks have that there. And so they didn't have this kind of technology, right, that we have.
Right,
but yet they were somehow producing quite a bit.
Right.
I would say now we have that challenge. We have a lot to make it out there, but it's sometimes a challenge to get enough of the content and also content in centralized places. One of the challenges.
The irony of that, Howard, and I thought about it with this Lupe bad bitch or bitch bad whole controversy, right? And Lupe kind of going, ham over the fact that he got a bad review, in a magazine. And I'm like, if you have a critical contingent,
yes,
that is to do the job of representing the art in the right way, you don't need to care about what these other reviews have. And so how the hell could we have had that kind of critical apparatus 50 years ago when folks didn't have access to publishing houses the way that we do? There was no such thing as the internet. Now we have access. We can publish anything we want at any time, but yet we find ourselves hamstrung to actually speak back critically to what we're producing. You got some thoughts about that, Jessica?
Well, I think that I think it's really interesting the way that it kind of goes back to an older debate in the early 2000s where people were discussing how the internet is a space that's supposed to be, so open and so accessible and everybody can access it.
Right.
And really, when it comes down to it, and this is again where I think Black studies can really enter into digital humanities, it comes down to it, the same structures that we saw in the print world, in the real world, not the tech world, not the digital world. Those structures get replicated. So, that way that people have access to computers, access to publishing online or to blogs, a familiarity and a comfort with the technology, which is really, really important, a willingness to engage, time and space to engage, all of that becomes really, really critical to the extent that people are able to engage in this kind of digital public sphere. But then you also have the way that, media and capital are really, really invested in recreating spaces where they have the say over what gets published, what gets placed, what kind of reviews and who are the reviewers and what they're actually reviewing. So, I mean, it's interesting how there's so much potential in what's happening on the internet to create spaces where you can have a critical engagement. So I think for example, of Moya Bailey's work with the Quirky Black Girls, where she created, she and co-founded with Alexis Pauline Gumbs, created a space that would be a critical, empowering, safe space for queer people of color who wanted to have those kind of debates and conversations. And that way they could then enter into the analysis at point B instead of starting at point A with 101 over why it's important to even discuss Lupe Fiasco, Whereas, those spaces are really, really important. At the same time, you also have other spaces that are, much more capitalized, become more accessible or seen as the authority or authentic in the mainstream sense. So there's all these, I think what I'm trying to say is that there's so many different ways that the structures that we've always seen historically that are in the archive that we have studied and talked about in Black studies and Black history for so long are really just being replicated in the internet in both problematic ways and also in can be very empowering ways as well. And we need to figure out, I think we are still in the place as scholars who are invested in Black life and experience, we're still in the space where we're trying to navigate that. And unfortunately, it's moving really fast, so we need to we need to move faster than that. I should say somebody who's really, really doing interesting work around this and thinking through what happens, for example, in her words, when Black girls code is Renina Jarman, who's at University of Maryland. So I'm really looking forward to her stuff when it comes out, because I think it's going to get to this heart of what is happening on the back end, and where is the money, where are the finances, and who is vetting what kinds of things on the internet.
You're watching Left to Black. I'm your host, Anthony Neal. We're joined this afternoon for a special summit on Black Studies and the Digital Humanities. We're joined by Howard Rambsy II, who is Associate Professor of English, Language, and Literature and the Director of the Black Studies Program at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, the author of The Black Arts Enterprise and the Production of African American Poetry. And we're also joined by the brand new PhD, Jessica Marie Johnson, who's a postdoctoral fellow in the Africana Research Center at Penn State University. So I'm just going to put this idea out there, and I'll take the brunt of it, right? Because it's not a nice idea, right? But in some ways, when you hear the terms new technology, digital humanities, and Black studies, it's almost as if there's an oxymoron. And it speaks to two very interesting tensions, right? On the one, if we look at Black studies proper, the fact that it's a field that continues to be driven by older scholars, still very much tied, despite the work that you do, Howard, much tied to a 1960s style Black studies model in terms of the kind of work that we're supposed to do, which is why there's always been this tension around bringing gender and sexuality into the conversation. Yeah. Folks who, you were here, Howard, for Black Thought 2.0, and Abdul Kalamat, who's been doing yeoman work in terms of actually a Black presence in the internet, but his model is an older, dated model, right? These are folks still on a listserv. So we have that particular tension within this kind of oxymoron between digital humanities and Black studies. And then you look at it from an institutional side, that when all of these deans and provosts are looking around for the folks who are going to do the cutting edge work, the last folks they think about are Black folks, right? Black folks don't do technology, right? Even when you got folks who do that kind of stuff, right? They're never included in those conversations, right? Because, let me just be frank, it's just Black shit, right? And it's over here in this corner, and it never is integrated into what the folks do in the mainstream of the university, even as the mainstream university is going forward with this idea of digital humanities. So how do you combat this work? On the one hand, dealing with the old heads, right? But also educating these institutions about the fact that not only are we using this technology, right, in very interesting and proactive ways, productive ways, but in many cases, if we read some of the research that's coming out from all these studies, we're actually using it in cutting edge ways that actually has a great deal to teach the university about how to do digital humanities.
I'm with you right on that tension. I directed Black Studies, but I'm also in literature, and I was thinking about it with the Modern Language Association conferences, where they do so much and they have so much funding and so many panels on digital humanities. But over the last, I would say 2 or 3 years, they may have had like 80 panels on digital humanities. Only 2 of them have been on African American literature, right? Right. So, but then I belong to another organization, the College Language Association, mostly African American.
Do they have a digital technology panel?
They've done 2 digital humanities, 2 or 3 digital humanities over the last 2 or 3 years. I organized both of those, So it's a very interesting kind of moment to be in, where you go on the so-called Black space. It is not a lot of digital, but then you go on the white space, so-called white space, and it's not race, So it's always making you figure out, like, where do you hang out? Maybe I just hang out on Black Twitter or something. It's a weird kind of space to be in. I tell you what, I really can't say that I figured out what to do necessarily. About the larger structural issues. I think one is just to kind of keep pushing folks, and particularly the young folks, the graduate students I work with. It's always good to get involved with them on projects and just hope that we can start building some bases around there. And especially even folks younger than me, they teach me so much about the technology because they've just been native to it, right? And so they'll have all of these ideas, but just lack the kind of long-term training I've had. And so we'll figure out ways to, I guess one big answer has been just doing more collaboration with folks.
Right.
Though my only apprehension, though, is you're right, like in terms of the big funders, they haven't paid attention much to African American projects, and certainly, like you say, Black studies, because it is viewed as a problem. Even the blackness of Black studies is sometimes a problem. It causes all kinds of problems for other folks.
I mean, Jessica, Howard and I are tenured, right? So we're insulated from this in lots of ways. I mean, how do you imagine you will be able to navigate, really pushing against these boundaries at the same time that you're trying to climb up the ranks, to be able to have the comfort and protection to do the kind of work that you're going to do?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a kind of difficult balance to strike for exactly the reasons that you're saying. I think it's both sides. On the Black studies side, Black history side, there's a sort of reluctance to deal with technology and digital humanities in particular. The digital humanities side, there's a reluctance and an assumption, like Howard was saying, that Black folk just don't do that. I think that there's a few ways that I think that scholars right now, even newbies like me, can try and dive into this and tackle it. A couple are one would be engaging with the digital humanities cadre, but on our own terms. So there are a couple of VAC camps, which are basically kind of conferences that are not structured, where they're very collaborative, and they're basically, in a lot of ways, sort of remixes of regular conferences. They're call and responses of regular conferences. I mean, there's something that could be very, very familiar to a kind of Black aesthetic. And so there's one happening at Rutgers in just a few weeks in October 10th to the 13th, I think, called That Camp Theory, which is specifically geared towards challenging the assumption in digital humanities that there is no theory involved, that their theory is not important. And the theory that they are really pressing forward is, theory that is about race, that is about gender, sexuality, disability studies, all kinds of things like that, which is going to be really great. So there's that side of us engaging and stepping into it. Of course, that puts the onus on us, which is really, which is problematic and unfair. So there's also the part where we really pressure our institutions to support initiatives that are already out there, that are geared towards initiatives that are already combining the two. So what comes to mind for me is you can bring an organization like Black Girls Code to campus, which is both an opportunity to then engage with a program that is doing on the ground work promoting girls of African descent, and getting them introduced to technology early, so that some of this accessibility issue can get that digital divide, so we can close that gap a little bit. And there are other programs out there that are like that. I mean, for some people, it's whatever your flavor may be, but bringing those campus, pressuring administrations to say, hey, this is really important. People are doing this. This is an investment in the community. This is an investment in your campus, and your campus looks good. So make those steps. And I think the last one would be to really support and publicize, especially for us now, and this is things that we can do that is about our community, publicize work that's happening now. Carla Peterson who is a professor at University of Maryland, just was a finalist for the Frederick Douglass Prize out of the Gilder Lehrman Institute. This is a fantastic prize. It's one of the it's the Oscars for scholars of slavery, and it was for Black Gotham, which was a history of Black families and community in New York City. Well, she also created a website in collaboration with the Maryland Institute for the Humanities. And this website it's this dynamic, robust site full of photos, images, archival work. I mean, that can be used in class, that can be shared with other people, that can be posted on blogs and shared on Twitter. So there's really fabulous work that's happening right now that's out there that we could really, hype up. I mean, I posted on this on Diaspora Hypertext a little bit just because it was so exciting to see that, people are really invested in using the tools that are being circulated. And also it's inspiring for me as a new scholar to think about ways that I can, as a historian, as somebody who's interested in the archive, who's interested in sort of, busting open the archive and bringing, some of this research and understanding beyond just, the paywalls of the ivory tower. It's an example of what you can do with that work. So there's all kinds of other, there's people who are doing that, but I think that those are three really concrete ways that, I as a young scholar am looking forward to kind of diving into, but all of us as, as a Black studies, institution can really, use to move this project of digital humanities and Black studies forward.
Mm-hmm.
So what's up next for you, Howard? What are you working on these days?
Well, the next thing I would say is a project that actually goes small. On the Black Arts Movement, I looked at dozens of writers, but now I'm kind of focusing in on 4 contemporary writers, Colson Whitehead, Aaron Magruder, Ta-Nehisi Coates, and Kevin Young, a poet. So one is a novelist, one is a comic strip writer, one is a blogger, and one is a poet. So I'm trying to look at talking about actually how these writers receive a lot of support and how that influences conversations about race, and also how they use technology to really get their messages out there.
Yeah, I'm trying to get through the Gray Album as we speak, that big book of Kevin Young.
Nice.
Yeah.
And so, Jessica, I know in a traditional sense, you will be transforming that dissertation of yours into a monograph. But I'm sure that's not the only thing that you're working on these days. So what kind of projects are you working on these days?
Well, since we're talking about digital humanities, I'm really interested in pushing forward African Diaspora PhD. People can submit to it, so they can go to africandiasporaphd.tumblr.com/submit, and they can, add posts, links, books, things that they found. And I'm interested in kind of, seeing how far I can take that. I'm also interested in continuing to push forward this connection between slavery and the digital humanities. I'm really interested in the way that technology and Black folks' understanding of technology and how that works also plays into our historic relationship to it. So the technology of slavery, slave ships, technologies of punishment, technologies of labor, and how all of those are kind of integrated in our understanding that has come down to us of our relationship to even, tools like this, and how that may connect to the representations of slavery that are circulating right now. So those are things that I'm sort of playing around with as I work on transitioning the dissertation into a book manuscript, because that is my #1 project.
You're watching Left of Black, and we've been joined this afternoon by Professor Jessica Marie Johnson, who's a postdoctoral fellow in the Africana Research Center at Penn State University, curator of the site Diaspora Hypertext and also the site African Diaspora PhD. We're also joined by Howard Rambsy II, Associate Professor of English Language and Literature and the Director of the Black Studies Program at Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville. He's the author of The Black Arts Enterprise and the Production of African American Poetry, that's University of Michigan Press, and curator of the site SIUE, that would be Southern Illinois University at Edwardsville, Black Studies. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, folks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All black everything, all black all black in the name of all my black heroes. All black everything, all black polos, all black medallions, yeah, all black, all black everything. Polo and socks symbolize we not defeated by them system and cops. Word to knots, and that all black leather